This is the Farming for a Better Climate podcast. I'm Seamus Murphy. In this podcast, myself and agricultural consultant Alex Pirie travel to Woodhead Farm near Newmilns in Ayrshire and speak to the farmer John Kerr. John was a climate change focused farmer from 2014 to 2018. He was keen to improve profitability, reduce costs and cut the carbon footprint on his farm. Throughout the 4 years of the project, John managed to improve his farm efficiencies and reduce his carbon footprint by 6% with no loss of production. This podcast was recorded in early 2020 prior to the COVID-19 pandemic. So John, you were a climate change focused farmer for nearly 4 years there. What led you to get involved in the project initially?
The project was sold to us as a way of improving the efficiency of our business, and we've been able to share the journey of making our business more efficient with other people. I had to look at every aspect of what we were doing. The whole premise of it was doing the same with less or doing more with the same. And that's a mantra we've very much stuck to even ever since the project ended.
Yeah. What were the particular changes that you made then during the project?
During the project we looked at cow tracks, the design of them. We used recycled astroturf for resurfacing them. We looked at animal health and nutrition and tried to make improvements on both those fronts. We also looked a lot at milk cooling, although it was after the project ended before we actually were able to instigate some of the changes that we wanted to there.
Yeah. As a dairy farm, you'll know yourself that you go through an awful lot of water. With regards to the plate coolers, where did you go with that? What were your kind of final conclusions?
Well, what we have ended up doing is we installed a second plate cooler, which runs from, it's actually an old ice bank milk tank, and it's just on a closed loop, so it's the same water going through it all the time.
Yeah.
It's not actually net using anything. Occasionally might need a little top up here and there, but it's made a huge difference to the length of time it takes to cool the milk. It's actually more or less getting to the tank now under 5 degrees. Tank really doesn't have to do an awful lot at all.
Yeah.
It has made that whole system an awful lot more efficient.
In terms of getting water to the cows themselves for drinking, was there any scope to incorporate any of that?
We have looked at it a few times, and it's something that we might improve on in the future. At the minute we haven't done anything because we've been digging up floors and finding where pipes go that were laid 40 years ago. But there is probably a scope to do something there in the future.
You did take a look at a kind of arable silage. Where did you land on that?
We made an arable silage. Well, previous to that, we'd done whole crop of the year just as a way of reseeding some fields. We made the arable silage for a year as a kind of nitrogen. It has diesel in it, so it fixed its own nitrogen, so it was a cheaper crop to grow.
Yeah.
Nutritionally, it was all right. Not maybe quite as high in starches that the whole crop itself would have been. We haven't actually grown it again since, not because it was particularly bad, more because we harvested it with wagons rather than a forager and ended up lifting every stone in the field into the pit. You live, you learn. That's in future. If we do it again, don't do that.
What are kind of ground and field conditions like for that here? Would you say you're quite well suited to producing an arable silage?
It worked well, yeah. I mean, you get a tremendous bulk of feed off of a small area. If we're ever in the situation where we need to produce bulk, it certainly is a good tool in the box. And like I say, I mean, quality wise it wasn't bad.
Yeah. But grass is king.
Grass is king, yes.
Yeah.
Grass is king. We can grow, most years we can grow more of that than we need. And a stack of bales to prove it this winter.
Yeah. That's a good position to be in. In terms of your kind of fertiliser management plans, your liming programme, what are you doing with the fields? Well,
during the project we soil sampled twice, in the first year and again in the fourth year. We're probably about due to be doing it again this year. We lime on the basis of those soil tests. The other thing we found was that our soils are naturally high, perhaps it's just the fact that the cows are recycling it all through And the slurry, we don't need to put on any potash at all. What we get in the slurry is plenty for that, so we've been able to cut that out of the fertiliser usage and just use a nitrogen and phosphorus product.
So moving kind of towards livestock and away from the fields, what kind of improvements or decisions have you made around calves, housing of calves and the cattle themselves?
In terms of the housing of calves and cattle, we've actually just started, or this summer we're going to start the construction of a new building.
Mm-hmm.
The initial plan for it was to be young stock housing, but actually we've moved away from that, and part of it's now going to be used for the milking herd.
Mm-hmm.
The other part of it's going to be used as our main calf rearing facility.
Okay. What influenced the decision to move away from the calves in that shed?
Well, it just seemed more sensible if you're going to have a new, more modern, more airy space to actually use the productive animal or have the productive animals in it, and use part of the existing shed for the heifers, which will have less of which are smaller, so therefore it doesn't matter that the roof's a bit lower. Or
Yeah. You see these igloos are becoming increasingly popular as alternatives to calf housing. What are your views on them, and what do you think?
The calf rearing facility we're going to build is going to be based around using igloos.
Mm-hmm.
We have 2 of them already, and we like them, although what we've done with them so far doesn't work as well as it probably should, but that's not down to the igloos, that's down to the way that I built it.
Okay.
I know what I did wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I won't make the same mistake twice, I hope. So
Yep.
when we move into the new facility, it should all run a lot more smoothly than it does now.
Looking back on the project, what do you think that you did particularly well? What worked and what maybe didn't work so well?
What worked well was done what we set out to do, is to become more efficient. We use our resources better. We don't feel now that we're buying things in that we don't need. There's a lot that I'm sure every farm could do to improve how efficiently they run, and it's not always things that you'll immediately think of. Like you might be quite used to your milk getting to the tank at 20 degrees, and you'll never think that it can actually be lower than that. A lot of people told me that it couldn't be any lower than about 10 to 15. Well, I've proved that wrong by doing something quite practical, and presumably every farm will be the same, that there will be places where you maybe aren't doing as well as you maybe think you are. There's always learning to be had and improvements to be made.
You mentioned your dairyman there. How important is having a good team on the farm?
It's vital.
Yeah.
It's vital. I like to think my job actually is as much about looking after the people that look after the cows as it is about looking after the cows themselves. And I've been quite fortunate in that we have a good dairyman and other staff who are all seemingly very committed to doing a good job.
As part of the project, you carried out a carbon audit, and you managed to reduce your carbon footprint quite a bit in the 4 years. Was there other benefits that came along with that?
Where we have seen benefits though is in the productivity of the farm. Last year, for instance, we have produced more silage than we needed, haylage, and also ended up combining our barley and selling the grain, which was an income that we never expected to have.
Yeah.
But simply we didn't need it for whole crop, so we were able to sell it on. And that's off the same areas we had at the start of that project, with the young stock now at home, where before they were actually away on another farm. So we're carrying more stock and producing more output altogether.
Yeah. Was there any drawbacks to any of the kind of the systems that you implemented over the course of the project?
Struggling to think of any.
Anything maybe you would do differently if you had a go again then?
Try and have more engagement with other farmers through it. The message that we're trying to get out at the time perhaps didn't get through just as well as it could have. Whether that'll have changed now when climate change and carbon sequestration are more in the news or not, I don't know, but that's probably where I would have said we could have made some improvements.
And why do you think that was the case at the time?
I think it was something that wasn't in the minds of a lot of farmers at the time. I think it much more is now. Add to that there are so many meetings from so many different organisations that happen that you can be at something every other day, every week, if you're minded to. And Sometimes you just have to say no, and I think it was one that was just too easy to say no to.
You mentioned there that climate change wasn't maybe at the front of folks' minds while you were involved in the project. Seamus and I were both at Agri-Scott not that long ago, and we interviewed a couple of farmers on the day, and the impression that we got was that agricultural perception of climate change is very much on the rise. It's kind of climbed the political agenda, and that farmers have kind of kept pace with that. How do you see climate change affecting agricultural policy going forward, and do you think you're in quite a good position to face that?
I think I'm in a good, I particularly in a good position to face that, as through the project I've got a lot greater understanding myself of what the problem is and how we can address it. Mm-hmm. In terms of the political situation, it is definitely a driver for politicians now. So regardless of what farmers think about it, it's something we're going to have to deal with. Because that is just the way society, the way politics is going now.
Do you think that members of the general public have an understanding of the kind of challenges that farmers face?
No, not at all. I think that we're seen and we're perceived to be part of the problem, whereas as an industry we're probably going to be a bigger part of the solution than most others.
Yeah.
Do you think that's something that the industry has to tackle as well, trying to get that message out?
Yes, yeah. Definitely. And there's a huge perception problem driven by social media and various celebrities and groups with beliefs about diet, that agriculture, and particularly livestock agriculture, is a big contributor to global warming. It makes up less than 10% of the UK's total carbon emissions.
And this is a year of COP26. The United Nations will be coming to Glasgow for their climate change conference, and this is a good opportunity to get some good news stories out there and the agricultural side of the story across. From a Scottish perspective, a tremendous amount of agricultural land is deemed as less favoured area. So the kind of general idea with that will be that it's unsuitable to cultivation, at least on a kind of regular, recurring basis. So yeah, absolutely, the livestock agriculture has a big role to play there. I mean, nobody wants an unmanaged landscape. Grazing livestock are kind of the key to that.
There's also an issue around soil health as well, because I know some parts of eastern England where they haven't had livestock for years, mm-hmm. they're having to reintroduce them now because they've actually found that the soil bacteria just aren't there anymore. They're not breaking down the chopped straw that they're spreading back onto the fields. Mm-hmm. So they've actually had to start bringing in livestock again just to get the biological processes in the soil working properly.
We've a soil regenerative agriculture group now that's based up in the northeast of Scotland. What they're looking at is putting in cover crops and bringing livestock back on to do that exact thing, because the farmers themselves have found they're concerned because they've found that there's very little life in the soil.
I think typically as well, when it comes to Scotland, you've kind of got this east-west split, where a lot of livestock agriculture will be undertaken on the west coast, and a lot of your kind of cereal, arable production will be on the east. And there has been this kind of shift back to a more traditional style of agriculture and moving the livestock back into the east. But yeah, about getting that diversity on farm, something that we knew 50 years ago, mm-hmm. Before a kind of push on intensification.
And John, do you think that these conversations are being had more and more in farming communities then throughout Scotland?
I think they'll have to be those conversations will have to be had, even if they're not already. Just it needs to be a more holistic approach.
Yeah.
I don't think that necessarily we're talking about everybody going organic, because I think that's counterproductive in other ways. Where we need to be is somewhere between the extremely intensive agriculture which we were heading towards, which some of us probably got to, and an organic system. Somewhere in the middle there is where we probably should be. There are things we can learn from both ends of the spectrum there.
Do you think then, in light of all this, farming in 10 years' time is going to look a lot different than what it looks like now?
I would say though that farming is a constant evolution, and a farm now looks very different to what it did 10 years ago. So in 10 years' time I would fully expect it to look very different to what it does now. Mm-hmm. That has never changed. Yeah. Since the first person in Persia dragged a stick through the dirt and chucked some seeds in behind it, farming has been a constant state of change ever since.
Yeah. So it's an industry that's well used to changing. So it's been almost 6 years since the climate change focus farms began, going on 2-3 years now since it ended here or finished here at Woodhead. What changes have you made since then, or what changes are you planning on making in the farm in the future?
We have started growing a bit of grain again, mostly as a way of reseeding fields. Last year it paid a dividend for us as well, in that we got selling the grain and were able to use the straw. The young stock are now all kept in-house here, where at the start of the project certainly they were on a contract rearing arrangement elsewhere. The other major change we've made is that we've moved away from our Frisian and Ayrshire cows and are now using a three-way crossbred with Holstein, Norwegian Red and Fleckvay, which gives us a bull calf which is actually worth selling rather than having to be disposed of.
Something a bit stockier.
Yes, it's basically a milking Simmental. Quite nice animals to look at, but my God, they're stupid.
Yeah.
Can walk into a corner and can't work out how to get themselves back out and things. There's a constant learning curve, just at a slightly different type of animal. We're now milking all three of those breeds, so hopefully that gives us a longer lasting animal which is productive, and a bull calf which can be sold into the beef sector.
Would you encourage people to look at diversity in the herd on a breeds level?
I think you do what's right for you. I've never been someone who's into showing cows. I'm not a dairy farmer because I'm particularly attached to dairy cows. I'm a dairy farmer because it's the best option for me. And I want a cow there that is going to be very functional. I'm not going to be taking it to shows. I'm not going to be worrying too much about the pedigree of them. And this was seemed like quite a logical step. If you sat down with a blank piece of paper, what do I want from my cows, and what came up with, what I ended up with, is pretty much what I'm now breeding for.
Yeah. So what John, would be your message to farmers for the future? What do you think people should be looking at? Should people be hopeful?
I should certainly be hopeful, and don't get yourself tied in knots about all the noise in the media and all the people who seem to have it in for the agricultural industry at the minute, because most of them don't know what they're talking about. We have a good story to tell. There are positive messages to get out there. We can probably do a better job of doing that. And coming down the pipeline is probably a lot of the technology that is still to come will solve most of the problems which we have with regards carbon sequestration, methane emissions from cattle and things. The tools are coming. They're maybe not here yet, they might be 5-10 years away, but there is a positive story to be told there. Farming is part of the solution to climate change, not as much as it's ever going to be part of the problem.
For more information on what John has done at Woodhead, please visit the Farming for a Better Climate website, where you'll find more information on practical work that has been done by other focus farmers and our current soil regenerative agricultural group, and more information about climate change and agriculture and how you can mitigate and adapt your farming business. And please follow us on Facebook and Twitter for more information and updates from Farming for a Better Climate.